This is Porch Lore, and I'm your host, Devin. This is the tale of Whispering Pines. There's something about winter storms that strips away every illusion of control we think we have. You can plan, prepare, check the forecast 100 times. But when nature decides to cut you off from the rest of the world, you're still helpless. That's the lesson I learned last winter when Chelsea and I had decided to rent a cabin in a place called Whispering Pines. Chelsea had found the listing online, an old family-owned property deep in the Appalachian Mountains. It was advertised as rustic but comfortable, with hiking trails, a fireplace, and a hot tub that we never even got the chance to use. It sounded perfect for our little bestie escape, a way to recharge after a stressful holiday season. The place was remote, but that was part of the appeal. No phones, no emails, no noise. Just snow, silence, besties, and some books we've been meaning to read. We drove up early to beat the incoming snowstorm. The sky was already a heavy gray by the time we turned off the main road onto a narrow lane flanked by towering pines. The cabin itself tucked so far back in the forest that we didn't see it until we were practically on the doorstep. It was quaint, sure, but there was an edge to its charm, like it had seen some stuff. The wood siding was weathered, the shutters askew, and a small shed out back leaned so badly to one side it looked like it might collapse. But the inside was cozy enough. Knotty pine walls, a wood stove in the corner, and the unmistakable scent of old furniture. The owner had left a note on the counter welcoming us and apologizing for the lack of modern amenities. Chelsea laughed, saying, are we going to be Dr. Quinn this weekend or what? By the time we unloaded the car, the snow was majorly coming down. Big, heavy flakes that piled up fast. We weren't worried, though. We'd brought enough food for a week, and we had the wood stove for heat. If anything, the storm felt like an adventure. But that first night, I had trouble sleeping. It wasn't the wind or the cold. I'd expected those. It was the scratching sound. Faint at first, like the creak of a tree branch against the roof, but then it moved. It started at one corner of the cabin, then crept along the wall, then stopped abruptly near the back door. I kept telling myself it was just a raccoon or maybe a loose shutter rattling in the wind. But still, I didn't sleep much. By morning, the snow was knee-deep and the sky showed no signs of clearing. The forecast had called for 12 inches, but we were already well past that. Chelsea suggested we check out the shed to see if there was a snow shovel or sled or something to dig us out. The shed was barely standing, its roof sagging under the weight of the snow. Inside, it was cluttered with old tools, gardening supplies, and a rusted-out snowblower that hadn't been used in years. But what really caught our attention was the trap door in the corner, hidden beneath a pile of rotted wood and a tarp. It wasn't locked, just stuck from years of not being used. Chelsea pried it open with a crowbar, revealing a steep staircase leading down into darkness. It didn't make sense. The listing hadn't mentioned a basement, and the layout of the cabin suggested there wasn't one. Why would there be an underground space out here, away from the main house? We didn't go down, not then. The darkness felt too thick, too heavy, and the air that wafted up smelled of damp earth and something faintly metallic. Chelsea said we should leave it alone, and I didn't argue. But that night, the scratching came back, louder this time. It started just after midnight, the same creeping sounds along the walls. Then came the thuds. Slow, deliberate, like someone pounding on the logs with a closed fist. Chelsea and I sat frozen in the living room, staring at the front door. The wood stove cast flickering shadows across the walls. And for a moment, I thought I saw something move outside the frosted window. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe an animal, maybe the wind. But when the sound shifted to the roof, our excuses fell apart. Whatever it was too heavy to be anything natural. The next morning, we found the tracks. They circled the cabin, deep impressions in the snow that didn't look like any footprints I had ever seen. They were elongated, almost claw-like, and they stopped abruptly at the shed. Chelsea insisted we check what was down there, even though I was dead set against it. This time, we brought a flashlight. The stairs creaked under our weight as we descended into a small, dirt-floored room. The walls were lined with old shelves, and in the corner stood a wooden chest. It wasn't locked, just latched shut, but opening it felt like a mistake. Inside were jars, dozens of them, filled with a viscous black liquid. Some had strange objects floating inside. Teeth, bones, unidentifiable shapes. A piece of paper was taped to the underside of the lid, covered in handwriting so shaky and smudged it was barely legible. The only words I could make out were, "Property of Dr. A. Ward. W-A-R-D. Doctor? Jars full of body parts? This was giving mad scientist vibes, and I was not here for it. We left the shed and decided to call for help, but our phones had no signal, and the storm had buried the car. There was no walking out, not in snow that deep. That night, the banging started again, but this time, it wasn't just on the walls or the roof. It was coming from the shed. By the time we worked up the courage to look, the trapdoor was open and the chest was gone. The sounds outside grew louder, more frenzied, like something circling, hunting. At one point, Chelsea swore she saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods, just barely visible in the moonlight. When dawn broke, we made a run for it. It didn't matter that the snow was still falling or that the nearest town was miles away. We couldn't stay another night. We never made it to town. About halfway down the road, we were intercepted by a snowplow. The driver, a burly man in his 50s, told us the storm had stranded several travelers and offered to take us back to his place until the roads cleared. We didn't tell him about the cabin or the sounds or the trapdoor. But as we rode back in the plow's cab, I glanced back at the cabin one last time. Something was standing on the roof. It was tall and possibly thin, with limbs that bent in unnatural angles. It watched us until the cabin disappeared from view. When we pulled up to the tow truck driver's cabin, an old hound dog ran out to greet him. As we pet the dog, Chelsea and I both sighed a breath of relief. The kind of peace that only a little furry friend can bestow. When we got inside, the man rushed down a dark hallway, and Chelsea and I both looked at each other a little nervously. It's pretty much every intelligent woman's cardinal rule to not get into a car and go home with a burly, strange man. But we were desperate. And weighing our two options, our odds seemed better with old dude in his cabin than with whatever it was I saw standing on the roof of ours. Or so I thought. The man emerged from the back of the house with 2 lush, fluffy bath towels and 2 pairs of men's XL sweatpants. He chuckled sheepishly as he said, "Sorry, ladies, us mountain men don't really have the best accommodations for 2 young ladies such as yourselves. But they're warmer than what you've got." His accent was odd. I couldn't place it. It kind of sounded German, but like he was trying to hide it or something. We both looked at each other, dripping wet in our snow-soaked jeans, and let out a grateful giggle as we grabbed the towels and sweatpants. After guiding us to his spare bedroom, he asked us if we'd like something to drink. He mentions that he's a big hot chocolate fan and has a special recipe handed down to him from his German ancestors. Being of German descent myself, and also a chocolate fiend, without thinking, I immediately accept his offer for some of that sweet toasty cocoa. Chelsea smiles sheepishly and nods her head in agreement that she'd love a cup too. She asks him if he can show her the bathroom and tells me she'll meet me out there whenever I'm done, and she shuts the door behind her. His cabin was cozy, with a roaring fireplace and unique 1940s vintage decor scattered all over. I have a vintage shop on Etsy, and I know quite a lot about that particular era. Then I noticed what appeared to be a charger cord sticking out from underneath the bed. I bent down to pull it out, hoping to give my phone a little juice. As I tug on it, I realize it's stuck in a plastic storage box. I slide the box out from under the bed, and what I see next makes my stomach churn. The whole box is filled with cell phones, chargers, and wallets. First thing I notice is that all the cell phone cases look feminine. Glittery, pink, pastel, these looked like women's phones. I grab the first wallet I see and I open it up. Inside is an ID for a Tiffany from Indiana. Checking the date quickly, I noticed that the ID was expired. Then Chelsea called my name from the living room. I frantically shoved the box back under the bed and shuffled out of the room. I joined Chelsea, who is already downing her hot cocoa next to the crackling fire. The man is still in the kitchen making up my cup of German chocolate brew when I whisper to Chelsea about the box under the bed. First thing she says is, "Sounds like he slangs fake IDs and old cell phones for extra cash or something. A lot of people in rural areas skate around the law doing those kinds of things as a side hustle just to get by." I nodded as I thought about it for a minute. Yeah, that was probably it. That seemed logical. I mean, we had several guy friends in college who did the fake ID thing, and I remember they did have a lot of expired IDs in their possession. So I just let it go. Then the man comes back in with my mug of piping hot chocolate. Now this was the darkest and thickest hot chocolate I have ever had. He wasn't kidding about it being a secret recipe. But it must have been very dark chocolate, because as creamy as it was also very bitter. I took one sip and set it down. I started to realize that the stressful events of the past few days had really caught up to us, as I noticed Chelsea is already dozing off on the couch next to me. A cozy fireplace will do that to you. Then the doorbell rings, and the man strolls over to the front door and steps out onto the porch, closing the door behind him. It's a delivery driver with a package. "Hello, I have a delivery for Dr. Adolph Ward." Ward? Then it hits me. It was him. He was the owner of the chest in the shed. He was who we were trying to escape this whole time. Then I glance over at the hot cocoa in the mug. Oh my God, that black liquid. Did he put that black liquid from those jars into our drinks? Is that why it's so dark and thick? Oh my God. Without even thinking, I jump up and run back into the spare room. I pull my phone off the charger and decide I'm going to crawl out of that damn window and run. I will go get help and come back for my bestie, because if we both get stuck here, we have zero hope of surviving this. So there I am, in giant, oversized, creepy dude sweatpants running through the woods in a snowstorm. What was I thinking? I am never coming back to these mountains again. I kept running for what seemed like forever, until I see a faint light through the snow off in the distance. Now, I do not handle cold weather well, so at this point, I am running out of steam. But I just kept pushing myself, realizing that this is literally life or death at this point. As I finally made it to the edge of the woods, I basically tripped from my momentum and fell out of the tree line and into the parking lot of a Bojangles. Now, anyone who knows me knows how much I love a good breakfast biscuit and sweet tea from Bojangles. But I had never been happier to see that glowing yellow and red chicken sign than I was at that very moment. The employees inside Bojangles helped me call the police, and they were on the scene quickly. They drove me back up to where the man's cabin was. But where the man's cabin had been, sat an old abandoned run-down cabin that looked like nobody had been inside for 50 years. Then the police said, "Oh, that can't be the place. Nobody's lived there since that creepy German man who owned all this land up here disappeared. You know, there were always rumors that he was an escaped Nazi from Germany. One of those mad scientists, you know, that the government pardoned and brought over here for the space race. A lot of local kids say they see orbs around this place, and everyone says it's haunted." What? How could there be no cabin there? My best friend was just drugged on the couch inside that cabin next to a raging fire. And now it's somehow morphed into this dilapidated shack? This can't be happening. The police drove me up the path to our rental cabin and helped me dig out my car. They followed me back down the winding mountain road and made sure I got back on the highway safely. I filed a missing persons report for Chelsea, but I wasn't going to let this go. The drive home was spent in silence, trying to figure out what just happened to me. Was he a ghost? Did he find a way to manipulate time? Was that a time rift? Where, or should I say, when, is that evil man keeping my best friend? All I know is I am never going to stop trying to find her. And if you ever find a good deal on a cabin in the Appalachian Mountains, at a place called Whispering Pines, don't go